Okay, everybody, thank you so much for attending this Jewish Art Salon session. I want to particularly thank the curators, Judith Joseph and Dorit Jordan Dotan, and also the other team members, Cheselyn Amato and Chana Wiesenthal-Elias. Judith, are you up next?
Actually, Dorit.
It's me. Thank you, Yona. Welcome, everybody. It's so great to see you. We're coming together from around the world, as Judith said before. You can put your name, your location in the chat if you like. Also, when you have questions for the artists, please type them in the chat and we will call on you. The Open Studios programs features artists who are members of the Jewish Art Salon who responded to a call or were invited. We're happy to announce that Moment magazine mentioned our program in their current issue in an article about where to experience art online. Yay! Please note that this afternoon at 3 to 3:15 Eastern Time, the Milwaukee Jewish Museum will feature Jewish Art Salon Director Yona Verwer and Advisory Board Member Cynthia Beit-Rubin in a live Facebook event. Mark your calendars. The next Jewish Art Salon Studios program will be 2 weeks, in 2 weeks, Tuesday, February 9 at noon Eastern Time. Artist presenters will be Deborah Ogeretz, Emily Marbach, and Carrie Kessler. Our featured artists today are Carole Glauber, Linda Klein, and Miriam Stern. Stern uses a variety of mediums and materials in her work to interact between Judaism and feminist theory. Glauber captures cultures and people and tells a story about hidden moments. Klein's colorful paintings and drawings came out of a conscious awareness of her anxiety about where the world is going. Here is Judith.
Welcome, everyone. It's so great to see all of you. Each of our artists today conveys strong emotion in their work, wonder, whimsy, nostalgia, or passion. They present a pleasing contrast in the diverse visual language they employ. We're going to begin with Carole Glauber. Carole is a photographer and photo historian, a combination that influences the images she makes. Her work has been included in over 80 group and solo exhibitions worldwide, and she has received numerous awards, excuse me, for her photography and photographic research. These honors include the PX3 Prix de la Photographie Paris, the International Photography Award, the Tokyo International Foto Award, the Winterthur Museum Fellowship, and an Oregon Humanities Research Fellowship for her photographic research. She has lectured and written about photography and is the author of 2 books. Her latest book, Personal History, published by Daylight Books, the culmination of photographing her 2 sons for 30 years with a 1950s Kodak Brownie Hawkeye camera and color film, received a gold award from the Budapest International Photo Awards. And Carole, please unmute yourself and share your screen.
Thank you. I want to thank the Jewish Art Salon and Judith and Dorit for inviting me to be a part of this special series. It's an honor to be here. Almost a year has passed since COVID interrupted our lives. It created a sense of isolation that we have never before experienced. For my photography, it allowed a time of exploration in uncharted territories, and it was a time for experimentation for me. I noticed how aspects of my private life became public through my photographs. I built upon the idea of seeing the creative process in new ways. With lockdowns, masks, and social distancing, there is no creative map with directions. To look at my new work, first we need to take a quick look at some previous work, because I'm always building upon what I've just done. 3 years ago, we moved from Portland, Oregon to Renana, Israel. I began exploring my new town with my camera, and I discovered that so much of Israeli life is about community, that it's outdoors and is literally and metaphorically exterior as opposed to interior. Also, history has been my love since I was young. So I'm always thinking in my photographs about the idea of the historical record without really being documentary necessarily, but using the creative to mesh with the record. So I'm going to begin with my exploration of Renana and Purim, because there are all kinds of things that go on in Israeli life that take us up and take us down. And in Purim, the streets are filled with people in costumes. And with my camera, I can record the essence of my experience in my own way. The sadness of Yom HaZikaron, the day of remembrance of fallen soldiers, is observed with ceremonies at military cemeteries. And so we went to one not far from where we live. And there's the reminder that both women and men serve in our army. There's the softness of the flowers. And then there is the strength of the flower with the weapon almost in one hand that seems unique to Israel. At the outdoor ceremony for Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Remembrance Day, survivors have reserved seats. In Israel, sadness might be followed by joy, celebrating with a new Torah and dancing. And this procession was right outside my apartment building. This is actually in Jerusalem at the Kotel, but it's special because it indicates the intimate moments that happen in Israel at any given time. And then there is the joy that experienced almost simultaneously. And the moment of seeing people who have come from all over the world, bringing their customs and their ways of observance. But back in Renana, there is dancing on the sidewalk in the summer during a street festival, and dancing on Yom HaAtzmaut, the Israel Independence Day. A rooftop bonfire during Lag Bomer, and dancing around that. Caring for the elderly. This is a scene I see over and over again in Renana, and the young. Around the corner from me are people watching sports on an outdoor screen on a hot summer evening. And then there's Naf's barbershop, where he announces next to his door his hours of operation, Shabbat always closed. And just beyond that, the menorah for Hanukkah all ready to light while he's at work. And for me, that's a scene I've only seen in Israel. There's the henna ceremony at the Yemenite wedding of my daughter-in-law's sister's wedding. And then recording the expansiveness of a summer evening on the Mediterranean Sea. But then came COVID, and I was in the midst of working on my new book, Personal History. So I spent my days and weeks during the first lockdown, preparing my photographs for publication, writing, editing, and working with my book designer. And I have to say, I was never bored. Personal History was released by Daylight Books last November, and it has continued to receive quite a bit of attention, for which I'm grateful. Personal History is the result of photographing my sons for 30 years with this camera, the 1950s Kodak Brownie Hawkeye, and using color film. The book has 60 photographs and several essays and about the photographs, and even a haiku written by me. Because of the camera, My photographs are generally soft and saturated. And I decided that the flaws that resulted from using this camera have become part of the creative process. So this is Sam. And later in the book, this is Sam. And culminates in Ben's wedding. So I completed that project, but at the same time, I was starting to photograph new things because I was finished with this project. And so I started looking in my immediate surroundings because we're in lockdown. And so I started photographing more of my husband. And he became my new subject for creative exploration. And in fact, everything I did, it seemed like became part of creative exploration and trying to find new ways of making photographs that built on what I had previously done. So I'm always thinking about the light and mood and our situation. Harry doing more reading than he used to. Even an orchid blooming became almost a cause for celebration. So I was talking about the Scotch tasting party that would normally have been a social event with lots of people and laughter, and instead became an isolated event with faces on Zoom. Then Saturday night, and the light coming through the slats in the windows, and the light coming through from an apartment across the street. And so I think, I'll see what happens. And so this was the result. Then I turned the camera on myself, something I never do. So this is my self-portrait in the afternoon light and on our balcony and at the Mediterranean Sea. And this is an example where, again, I'm thinking about using the flaws that can happen in making pictures and using them as part of the creative process, something I learned to do while photographing my sons with the Brownie Hawkeye camera. So this is my self-portrait at the Mediterranean Sea. My self-portrait by moonlight. We didn't even have a TV when this started, so we were watching movies on the laptop. And this is where my apartment became public, whereas it was always private. This is our 36th wedding anniversary during the COVID lockdown on a warm evening. A birthday celebration. Movies were closed, so our city created drive-in movies in a public parking lot. So the lockdown eventually ended, and we went to Tel Aviv for a photo festival that was normally held indoors, packed with people, and instead it was moved outside. We even went on a water hike wearing our masks. And perhaps this is a bit emblematic of the feeling that some people have anyway of being limitations being placed on us. And I'm photographing at a distance. And I'm photographing with available light to see what would happen. And at twilight, after a group hike that we did with masks and social distancing. Still life by moonlight. And a return to Naf's barbershop with an image that is sort of emblematic of our times. For me, photographing during COVID has been about seeing life through the prism of history. It's been about memory, place, experimentation, new projects with a twist of the old, being masked outside and taking our masks off in our homes, and where private and public for us became blurred. There seems to be a desire to overcome the vulnerability that we are all experiencing that reflect our personal emotional highs and lows. It's about allowing the creative process to evolve within our new and unpredictable times. And again, for me, within the prism of history and record in the making. May we all stay safe and well. Thank you.
Thank you, Carole. That was very interesting. And now if there are some questions, that's the time to ask Carole. You can stop sharing your screen. I see a lot of compliments and thank you and how beautiful it is from people. You can see the chat yourself. I just, before somebody asks a question, I can just say that there was this photograph, the summer evening that you shot just before the COVID started and the lockdown. And I was interested to, because it was like different than all the others that were mostly very intimate in your family and your home. And this one was from above and in distance. And I wonder if you just can say in a few words what made you put it in this series together.
I'm not sure which one.
It's the one that you called the summer evening, and you said
oh, at the beach?
Yes.
Oh, because it was just part of what I was doing at the time and learning, because I spent so much time photographing people close. And so I was experimenting with looking at the bigger picture, and I called it looking wide. Just looking at the big picture of what I'm seeing in front of me. And there's so many things that go on in those images. If you start looking at parts of them, there's different things going on in different corners of the image. And it's almost an image that can tell us different stories instead of one.
Oh, thank you so much. There is a question by Kay Fleckoff or something like that. You can unmute yourself, Kay, and ask your question, please.
I just wanted to know whether you had difficulty acquiring film for your camera over the decades.
That's a very good question, because this camera originally took 620 film, and that was discontinued about midway through my project.
Oh.
And so this is before the internet, when you could just kind of get online and look for things. And so I knew a number of camera collectors, and someone told me about a guy in New Jersey who took these Brownie Hawkeye cameras and adjusted the inside a little bit, tweaked, scraping away the inside a little bit so that it could take 120 film.
Oh, okay.
And so I bought a camera, a Brownie Hawkeye from him that took 120 film and continued once I ran out of the 620.
Thank you.
Great.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much.
got a comment too.
Okay, go ahead, Judith.
Thank you. I just noticed, Carole, that as soon as the pandemic started and you started photographing your husband and subjects that were closer to you, because your world was smaller, I mean, it expressed a different emotional tone. And also I became more aware of the design elements in your work and the composition, which for me at least, was a little less obvious in the larger pieces, the far away, longer field of focus pieces. I'm not expressing it right. And I'm not saying it wasn't there, but looking at the pandemic pieces made me notice how beautifully you compose your photographs. And I especially love that one of your husband in front of the painting on the wall, and just the way the shadows were. It's beautiful.
Oh, thank you.
Just looking to see any other questions for Carole.
Well, we can have time for questions maybe after we end all the presentations. if anybody want to ask something. I don't see anything on the chat. So we go to artist, Linda Klein, right?
Right, that's correct. I wanted to first of all thank Carole, because I lived in Israel for 10 years, Carole, and seeing all of that work just emotionally got me a bit choked up. Thank you. So I want to thank the Jewish Art Salon for inviting me, and I see there are a lot of people here, and it's very exciting for me to present my work in front of everybody. I'm going to share my screen.
Just a minute, Linda, let me represent you.
Okay.
So this is artist Linda Lyon, and she's represented by Bromfield Gallery in Boston. Her work has been called poetic and apocalyptic in Art New England and the Boston Globe. She has worked in private collections in the US, Canada, England, and Israel. Klein was a professor of fine arts and the dean of the fine arts department at Endicott College. Earlier, she directed the international affiliate program in expressive arts therapy at Lesley University, where she taught expressive arts therapy. She received an MFA in painting and art history from the School of the Museum of Fine Arts at Tufts University and MA in expressive arts therapy from Lesley College. Linda studied studio art at the School of Art Institute of Chicago. It's all yours. You can share your screen. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I'm just going to start out here with some images that inspire me, and I'm going to read in September. I had an exhibition called Nature Defiant at Bromfield Gallery in Boston. So I'm going to read from the statement. So Nature Defiant in this work is devoted to celebrating the resilience of nature and enacting nature's desire to assert itself through forms that derive from nature itself and flourish in the human imagination as it creates the forms of things unknown. When I began this process so long ago, no one could have predicted the pandemic that has caused us all to pause. I too sometimes forget that we share this world with many life forms, unseen or ignored, until they assert themselves and demand my attention. I began by acknowledging what is right in front of me and before my eyes. This is what I've been doing for the past couple of years, seeing what is obvious, but also aware of the life teeming below the surface of the earth. It has brought me to a greater awareness of how our existence is interdependent. So the images that I'm showing you here are photographs that are the beginning resources for my process. A lot of these are taken from just walks that I take, or maybe even just plants in my house or other places. And what I do then is to acquire the shapes I use in my work, I draw or photograph a plant or insect, and then make a flat silhouette. So these images now are taken from those photos, and I Xerox them and cut them out to make various shapes. With that, I then create stencils that I might use repeatedly in the work. I choose different shapes from the silhouettes and place them in different relationships to one another in an attempt to create new shapes and new possibilities. The challenges I choose to encounter are all about the formal elements in making art: shape, color, form, line, value, etc. In most of the works, I do not stop with only flat shapes, but also add images I draw directly on the surface. This image that's up there now is from a shot in my studio, which has the paintings behind the plants that I had in the studio. I draw directly on the surface being either masonite or gesso board. And I use primarily alcohol-based permanent markers. And this is added to a lot of the liveliness of the surface. I also collage different shapes from vinyl and other materials. And I want to talk a little bit too about some of the process. So on here, for example, the board that I'm using, the masonite board, isn't gessoed. So consequently, it doesn't take the ink as well. So I might add some colored pencil, for example, in this, because it's all dark. I've used white colored pencil and maybe some acrylic paint to pull out the shapes. Here, there's a lot more color. I was very attracted to the flatness. I'm gonna tell you a little bit about that. When I was very young, about 4 or 5, I loved coloring and coloring books. I particularly wanted to achieve a smooth, flat color that did not belie the crayon as a tool. I liked the flat shapes, and I liked them because they had no modeling. As often happens in my process, I start out doing something without understanding its origin. I was making these works without realizing their relationship to the 5-year-old's experience. And I was enjoying the process as much now as I did then. So you'll notice that a lot of the shapes get repeated and they get placed in various relationships to one another to try in an attempt to create a new and original shape. So here, for example, looking at under the surface where you have the roots below the ground surface. In this piece, again, I've used here some acrylic paint, but also I used oil-based markers, again, to get the color, because the inks just sort of blend in. So I discovered, I want to thank my daughter, Gabriella, who's also an artist, for sort of, you know, she used some of these oil-based markers in her own work, and that's what I realized I could do. They sort of create the bright light in these otherwise very, very dark surfaces that are hard to get to. In this piece, the vinyl, it's the first time I used a color vinyl. I had been using the black vinyl. And interestingly, I chose vinyl because I discovered it once I was in a restaurant and they had used this vinyl to cut out these wonderful flat shapes that they had on the windows. And so it made me buy some vinyl and attempt to use it. And I really, really liked it. It stays on the surface. It's easy to use. And I like its flatness. This piece, of course, has no collage in it at all. It has some free drawing in addition to having the other stencil shapes that I might employ. Also, the naming of the work comes about after the piece. I never name anything. I don't start out intentionally trying to create a particular thing. It's very intuitive. And what I want to say about this piece is, in fact, I started this piece, it was upside down from what you see now. And its intention at the time was to create the black silhouettes of the trees against the sky. But it didn't work for me in the same way as turning it upside down and seeing them again as roots and all of this life that teems under the earth. I don't know how many of you are gardeners, but once you start digging around, you just find out there's so much there that we're unaware of. Here you can see I think this piece shows a great deal about how the shapes can create. They sort of bridge between what's animated and what is plant form. So even though these darker shapes were all created from plants, they seem to imply a more animated being. This piece also has collage from other sources besides the vinyl. And in this piece, Romance, that pink flower shape was actually a Xerox that came out because the ink was low, and I got this lovely pink color and really, really enjoyed it and put it in this piece. And what I want to point out here is how on the upper right corner, those shapes seem very joyful. And then when I apply them in this piece in the lower left, they become much more responsive to the mysterious monster, and they seem to be frightened. And this is the only piece I directly reference Corona. And the Corona, of course, is down in the lower right there. And I think this piece expresses a lot more positivity and joy, but it also implies what we don't see. I feel like there is so much animation in our world and in our universe that we just blithely go along and ignore. Maybe that's how we manage to survive. This piece, it's actually a Hebrew word, but I didn't know how phonetically to spell it. The kipod is a little hedgehog, and down in the lower right corner there was this little creature that seemed to imply a hedgehog to me. And it's a sort of family joke too, that my oldest daughter called my middle daughter Hedja when she was born. She wanted to name her Shmulik Kipod. So you Israelis will recognize that figure. This piece was in a show at Brumfield, again, a group show that was called Breathe. And for me, this piece was, of course, created after the death of George Floyd, who begged to be allowed to breathe. It also references, again, Corona and how it affects our lungs. So this pink shape for me is both a tree image and how the bronchioles and the lungs have these branches that reach out. There are little yellow fruit shapes that I see as a tree. They're like fruit, but in the lungs, they're the alveoli who get very clogged, unfortunately, with fluid and create such pain and suffering for the people who have the illness. This piece, this shot is just I wanted to show you the scale of the work. So this was the installation of my show at Brumfield. And the work is only, each piece is about 12 inches by 16 inches. So you can see they're very small. And they allow you, I find them very intimate as a result of that you can get close to them and take them in. These 4 pieces grouped together were actually probably the earliest pieces that I started, and you'll notice there's barely any color. On the far left, the color begins to creep in, and on the far right, there's a little bit of red there. But these, I started out really working with black, white, and gray, and then slowly began to add color. And here you can see I got really excited about the color. And the piece on the left, I think, is probably maybe the last piece that I made in this series. And yeah. That's it.
Thank you, Linda.
You're welcome.
Now at this point, you need to click on stop share. Thank you. Okay, good. Right. So I just enjoyed your presentation so much. And I especially appreciate that you shared your process with us. I found that really interesting. And I'm sure that all the artists here, which are most of the people here, really appreciate that and talking about your materials and things. I just want to mention an artist, a Chicago artist, who is no longer with us, but her name was Jean Pocklup, and she always created flowers and plants, and they had personalities. She would put a few, plants together on a canvas, and you really got the sense that they were having a dialogue. And there's some of that in your work too. It's certainly somewhat more ethereal, but sometimes, like you pointed out yourself, the little characters. So I really appreciate that. I'm looking at the chat, which is filled with compliments and accolades, and you'll get that later because we'll send it to you. Let's see, Deborah Riva had a question about the size. Go ahead, Deborah, unmute please and ask your question.
Okay.
Yeah.
She actually answered my question in her last painting. I mean, they're just stunning, and I wanted to know how big she worked or how small she worked. But the whole idea of what she said about they're small, and because they're small, they're intimate, and that's just beautiful. So thank you.
Are all the pieces that 12? I think you said 12 by 16 inches. Yeah. Linda, are they all at that scale?
The only piece that's larger is the piece called Gasp, the one with the tree image. That's a bit bigger.
Okay. So Sylvia Harati commented that they're perfect for Tu B'Shvat, which is so true. I didn't even think about that when we scheduled you, but it's absolutely appropriate. So I'm just looking, compliments, romance. Your color palette was commented on. It's so unusual the way, I mean, they're all so different from each other and the colors create different moods. Do you have any comments about how that comes about?
Well, it's pretty intuitive. I think I'm pretty in touch with my emotional conditions. So I think that definitely gets reflected in the pieces. It's so interesting when we think about COVID, because I think initially for me, not that I welcomed COVID, don't misunderstand me, but I did not resent the isolation. I found the isolation up to a point very welcoming, because it was almost that thing where you didn't have to have an excuse for not participating in something. And I'm sure every artist here probably appreciates that opportunity to just be left alone.
Absolutely. There's no question about it. And then you feel kind of guilty. I mean, I'm feeling guilty that it's so okay with me. I mean, yeah, I really do wonder how it's going to be for us when things open back up. I think that it's definitely going to be different. Let's see. So
there is a question by Tina Marcus.
Yeah, I was just going to mention that. I don't know if that question was answered about. Well, go ahead, Tina, and ask. Unmute, please.
Sorry about that. So my question is, maybe I missed this, but the work that she is working on, is this all from the onset of COVID? And
no.
if not, what was your prior imagery to that? So.
No, it wasn't. I started this work quite a while ago, before COVID actually hit us. But I think part of that had to do, I'm very involved in the environment and environmental issues. And I think for me, I had a super awareness of how we're just raping our surface of our earth and our own environment. And so for me, it was about nature being very defiant, in the sense that nature will continue. We may not, but it's almost like whatever changes happen in our environment may not sustain our life. But it was more about expanding my sense of what is beyond our sort of egocentric experiences.
I think we have time for one more question from Lloyd Abrams. Please unmute yourself and ask Linda your question.
Hi, this is Vivian. Actually,
Oh,
I'm screen stealing. No, what I was wondering was I noticed when your intro was being done that your training is as an art therapist, and I was wondering whether your background has influenced either the product or your process in your art.
Oh, definitely. I think expressive therapies, I studied with a magnificent, wonderful teacher who has since passed away within this past year, Paolo Canil. And I think Paolo really helped me get in touch very much with my process and being spontaneous and trusting it to get out of my head. You know.
Thank you.
I thought I had one, I'll respond to one other person ask a question about the stenciling. And the stencils I cut from a stiff board, you know, not too thick. And I use usually, you know, an X-Acto blade to just cut through them.
well, thank you, Miriam, or I'm sorry, Linda. We're going to move on to Miriam. And I must say that all that lush foliage is just a perfect antidote for the blizzard I'm looking out at. So thanks very much. So our third artist today is Miriam Stern. Miriam Stern is a painter, printmaker, and installation artist. She's exhibited both in the United States and Israel and has won numerous awards and prizes. Ms. Stern usually works in series that often use Jewish values and ideas as her themes. Her art has been reproduced in magazines and books of poetry. In addition to producing art, she has curated several art exhibitions and lectures about the relationship of art to Jewish interpretation of texts and ideas. In 2016, a monograph of her art was published. In 2019, before the pandemic, Miriam began the series entitled Cover Up, which includes paintings, monoprints, and collage mixed media work. She painted curtains, tarps, and boxes covering over parts of work while leaving bits and pieces of the original showing. Trying to conceal can become a futile act. These paintings are metaphors for what is happening in our society today. We may try to cover up history, but truth will emerge. Miriam, please unmute yourself and share your screen.
Okay, I'm unmuted and I will share the screen when I'm going to start the slides.
Perfect.
I also want to thank the Jewish Art Salon and all the hardworking organizers who arranged this and all the other artist talks. I think that we all appreciate learning about other artists that we haven't met and that we didn't know their work existed. And I appreciate that very much. Yasher koach to all the participants. I'm especially happy and honored to be given this opportunity to share my work. And as a side benefit, the idea that I could put on some makeup and earrings today, which I haven't done in a long time, was really felt good. So thank you for that. The name of the series that I want to talk about today is Cover Up. I began it at the end of 2019 before COVID. As the pandemic, isolation, as well as the Black Lives Matter movement began, the meaning and significance of the series changed and became more relevant to the times. Every now and then I go through my old art, mostly monoprints, and cull through them. The work I don't like anymore goes on a pile for use in future collages. This frees up room in my flat files, which is the major reason for doing it. Also, though, from a perspective of time, work that I thought was good turns out to be not so great, and these works also go in that pile. In 2019, I decided to go through my oil paintings. My paintings are mostly abstract, and I pulled out around 10 images that I set aside. I did not want to throw them out, and they sat in my studio begging me to do something with them. There were bits and pieces of the paintings that I really liked, and I didn't want to lose those parts. All right, this was the first painting that I did. The entire bottom section was from the original painting. and I decided to throw a tarp over the part that didn't work for me. I painted the green cover as if it were hiding a painting underneath, which it was. I liked the mix of abstract shapes and the more realistic cover-up. The mystery of what is behind the curtain and what are these unusual shapes and colors appealed to me. Go to the next, please. So I continued covering up my old paintings. Instead of a tarp, I wrapped part of this painting in brown paper and tied it with a string. The lower left string line was part of the original painting, and I used it to suggest the rest. Next, please. The third painting became more complicated as I covered over parts of the original and left isolated parts uncovered. Here, what's underneath peeks through the partial cover-up. I realized that doing these paintings was a metaphor for how we live our lives.
I think you got to mute. You got muted.
Muted.
Can you go back, please, to the one before it? No. Yes, that one. Sorry. I don't remember, I don't know when I got muted, but I realized that doing these paintings was a metaphor for how we live our lives. We are careful to choose what to reveal and what to hide. And here too, I was careful about what to paint over and what to keep. Over the years, I have used curtains in several of my series, and I will show a few examples of these works to give you an idea of where some of this originated. So we're going to take a little detour. Next slide, please. In 2005, 2006, I had a show at YU Museum called Ezrat Nashim. It was about women and Machitsot. A Machitza is a separation. In Orthodox synagogues, a Machitza separates men from women. Many Machitsot are made of fabric, which is the curtain that separates or hides the women. These figures show various Machitsot of different materials. Used here, they cover the women completely and their unique personalities are hidden from view. So the use of curtains for me has been a feminist tool to make a point of what happens when we hide ourselves behind curtains. Next slide, please. Part of the cover-up series I worked on now refers back to this Ezrat Nashim series. Here, parts of faces peek through the wall of curtains that act as the machitza. And the next slide as well, please. Okay, next slide, please. After my brother died in 2013, I started a series about my family called Mishpacha. I used curtains and walls here to express the idea of family secrets. We all have them. They are hard, if not impossible to keep, and it doesn't usually help us to try. Next slide. The curtain here is on a stage to represent the family drama. Every family has unique characters and with dramatic scenes and action. When the curtain goes up, the spotlight reveals the family dynamic and its secrets. Next slide. Next slide, please. Now back to the cover-up series. Here, the secrets that we try to keep spill out from behind the curtain and flow. Next, please. Then George Floyd was murdered. George Floyd's killing and the Black Lives Matter protests shook me up. As a white, Jewish, middle-class woman artist, I felt the need for introspection and an examination of my own racism and my country's racist and violent history. Here there is a figure-like image covered with a transparent tarp. Next, please. And another painting with more and more covered. Here the white cover-up are like shrouds that symbolize the murder of George Floyd and the countless others killed by hatred and senseless violence. Next, please. This collage has plastic tarps covering paintings in a museum. I actually saw this years ago and took photographs. I combined my own curtains with the museum's tarps, but the paintings still are somewhat visible. This highlights the idea that it is impossible to completely cover up our past. Next, please. The tarps became transparent or bandage-like, like someone who has committed a crime and tries to conceal it. It becomes a futile act. What is underneath comes through. Next. Here I painted boxes to use as the cover-up. In this case, parts of the original painting oozed through the box, like the crime of racism that cannot be cleaned or buried. Next. And finally, in this painting, the rag in the center looks like it is bleeding. We may try to cover up our history, but truth will emerge. In this series, even though the visual subject matter is benign, curtains, boxes, tarps, canvases, and such, the inspiration behind them and the impact I hope they engender is powerful. We cannot cover up our past. Rather, we must confront it personally and collectively with honesty. That's the slide show.
Thank you so much, Miriam. That was just very strong and touching, especially those images of Floyd. I wonder if you showed them somewhere.
Well, actually, the last painting is right now in a real show and the virtual show as part of Studio Montclair. That was a show about privilege and everyday life. And I was very honored to be part of that show along with other artists, New Jersey artists.
And your artistic voice is very important and very strong. And I think there are a lot of comments, very beautiful comments that you can read after. And Tina is having a question. You can unmute yourself, Tina.
Yes. Oh, your work is just amazing and so much to think about, Miriam. Super, super, super. Are they acrylics or are they oil?
They're oil.
Okay.
One or two are mixed media because sometimes I start off with acrylic to work quickly and then build it up with the oil. And in this case, for sure, because what's underneath has to be covered. So.
Beautiful work. Thank you.
Thank you.
Rosie is asking about the depth of your work. Can you say something about that?
The depth? Oh, death?
Depth.
D-E-A-T-H or D-E-P-T-H?
P-T-H. Yeah, Rosie can ask herself. She can, it's D-E-P-T-H.
Okay. They're oil on canvas, so the canvas are on stretchers. Most of them are, heavy duty stretchers, if that's the question that is being asked. But the other one, the other question about D-E-A-T-H is also an interesting one because I have dealt with that in series, especially the one on Mishpacha, family. I have gone through several series involving after my mother died, after my father died, and the most recent one with my brother's death. And it really made me, again, look inside and see the impacts of these people, what they had on my life. And I have dealt with that subject for over the years quite a bit.
Great. So Rosie, have another question? Go ahead, Rosie.
You're talking to me? Yes? Question. Do you intend to write about these imageries? I mean, they're very profound visually, but verbally, I'm dying to know the secrets and all that. So do you intend to do a memoir about your family? It would really be interesting. And then you could intersperse the ideas and the stories with your paintings.
It's an interesting idea, and I thank you for the question. As a visual artist, I'm not sure that I want to write about it, but it is certainly food for thought. I think that with the larger series, the Mishpacha series took me several years. It wasn't, this I'm working on now, this COVID series, or this cover-up series is so far just a 2-year project. The Mishpacha project, which involved many more years and much more extensive work. I'm not quite sure that it would impact the work more if you knew the secrets in my family. I'm not sure. I think the idea about using the metaphors of the stage and the spotlight and the curtains is strong. And for me, I think enough.
Okay, I think the imagery drama, the family drama is very universal. And you're right, it does impact everybody in their own way. But if you ever want to be interviewed, there's my email.
Okay, thank you.
There are a lot of
I
questions.
have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, hi. Hi, Miriam.
Hi,
It's
Debbie.
great to see you.
Thank you.
I was wondering about the use of your own work for this series. If you feel like you can go deeper, do you think these works are saying about something about your own relationship to your work, and your own personal judgment about the work of the past, or about your relationship to the work that you've created? And also, you have a distinct abstract vocabulary that appears in many of your works. I wonder if you could comment on many of the abstract shapes that occur in many of your works, if you have any thoughts about those.
I usually start working as a printmaker, and unlike many artists who do paintings and then follow up with prints, I do the reverse, and I start off with prints and then work on paintings. And most of the paintings, as I said, are abstract paintings. This, as far as looking back at my own work, I think all of us as artists do that. And when we're very close to the work, if we just completed it or are working on it, we're in love with it. We love it. But later on, maybe 6 months later or a year later, we're wondering, how did we ever do that? It's, at least I feel that way sometimes, like it's not so great. It's part of the process. And I think, as I mentioned it earlier, I do cull through my work every now and then. But this was the first time I actually culled through the paintings. It's much easier to go through flat files and pick out paper that you don't like. But going through paintings physically was hard. You had to pull them out of where you have them in storage, look at them, and then find another place for them. So physically, I was involved in choosing these. And then I had to decide, what am I going to do? It's not like I can collage them over. They needed to be painted, further painted. And I had to be far enough removed from them not to have feelings for them anymore, because it's very hard to take a brush and paint over something that worked at one point. But once you do it, it's very freeing, I felt. And as I said, in the beginning, this was before COVID, before George Floyd, before any of that. And I was just covering over the paintings, and the whole title, Cover Up, it has a lot of meaning. It has, just covering up, or what are you trying to hide? All of those things came through once I started painting, and I realized what I was doing. But it was a process.
So listen, there are a lot of questions. I think we over the time, but we can let Mark and then Regina and then some Sheila folks. Quick questions, and I think we're really 15 minutes over.
Just want to say thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Miriam, do you ever, are the things that you cover up able to be revealed by those who look at your art, or are there really things underneath there that you want to cover up?
There are paintings underneath. I have the original slides of what they were originally, so I know what they look like, but you know, right now they're covered over, so you can't see them. They're new.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think we need to wrap it up. And I just want to say that this is that today's snafus are a perfect example of what creative people do. We solve problems. And I'm really glad that with the help of Miriam's son, Mark, we were able, Mark, right? I think we were able, sorry for names. We were able to solve the problem, and I appreciate your help. It was a fabulous program, and I want to thank Miriam and Linda and Carole for presenting their incredible work. Our next program is going to be February 9th, and it will be featuring Deborah Ugoretz, Emily Marbach, and Carrie Kessler. And also this afternoon at 3 p.m. to 3:15 Eastern Time, the Milwaukee Jewish Museum will feature Jewish Art Salon Director Yona Verwer and Advisory Board member Cynthia Rubin in a live Facebook event. So if you go to Facebook at 3 p.m. Eastern Time and look for the Milwaukee Jewish Museum, you'll get to see them talk about their work. So that's a little bonus. So thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.
Thank you very much.
Everybody.